Salutations all! Today's video is going to focus on the distinction between positive and negative liberty or freedom. This is an important distinction, as if you find some political recommendation that conflicts with your idea of what freedoms people should or shouldn't have, there's a healthy chance that it's because you and whoever you might be engaging with value these two kinds of freedom to different degrees. In general, I recommend against positive liberty, but in favor of negative liberty. And by the end of the video, you'll understand what I mean when I say that and why someone would reach that conclusion. Positive liberty isn't really liberty because it isn't sustainable and requires violating the freedom of others. Isaiah Berlin previously put forth the theory of negative versus positive liberty as negative liberty is the freedom from coercion, while positive freedom is more like the freedom to something, the ability to access or do whatever you want. This can sometimes sound confusing, so I'll use bread as an example. For negative liberty, imagine a baker who wants to bake and sell bread, and this baker having negative liberty and negative freedom would be that the baker is free to use their tools, equipment, and ingredients to bake bread how they want to without some external authority locking them up because their baking methods violate the Convention of Getting Baked of 2011 or something along those lines. Essentially, he can make his bread however he wants, and he doesn't have to concern himself about any external coercion for no direct reason. Policies that favor protecting negative freedom are largely free market policies. The idea that you should be free to trade and engage in other voluntary economic acts without external aggressive forces compelling you to do so, compelling you not to do so, or compelling you how to do so. But what about positive liberty? For positive liberty, I'll use another bread-based example. Imagine a hungry person wants to eat a loaf of bread. However, the bread they want is being sold at a store for $5, while this person, sadly, only has $2. Therefore, this prospective customer and hungry person does not have the freedom to gain access to the bread they want because market forces are standing in the way of their desires. There is no outside coercive force preventing this person from buying the bread, merely the sell price that the aforementioned baker is willing to exchange their bread for. In general, positive freedom or liberty is represented by social welfare systems or general socialist communist ideas favoring increased government intervention. Let's say that this hungry person's society decides to give everyone $200 of food credits every month. Our hungry person is now able to buy the bread and therefore has gained positive freedom, a freedom to something. There are reasonable, sound arguments for positive freedom, but they come with drawbacks. If a man is thrown to a lawless desert island without food, water, or clothing, is he free? You could argue he isn't. He is only free to die. But he isn't really free to do or get what he wants. He lacks positive freedom. However, because this hypothetical island is lawless, he is abundant in negative freedom. He is free to pursue whatever he wants, but has no means to do so. Unfortunately, there are a few issues with positive freedom. First, positive liberty necessitates theft. There's no way around it. Granting positive liberty through government requires that you take from others, potentially against their will, and we call that theft. To illustrate this, think of a robber, maybe more specifically a mugger. He goes up to people, pulls a revolver to them, takes their money, and then lives large from it. However, he gets access to whatever he wants, assuming he never gets caught, of course. Like the man crawling through a desert without food or water is an extreme analogy for negative freedom, this is an extreme analogy wherein someone has obtained positive freedom. Positive freedom, while it does technically provide the people enjoying it more choices in life to pursue their goals, it generally necessitates interfering with the negative liberty of others. That's a problem, and an avoidable one, at least in theory. Going back to the hungry person buying bread with the government food credits, this at first seems better than the robber scenario, but it's just a less extreme but similar method and outcome. If the state is taxing the store owner in order to pay for these food credits, and the store owner doesn't want to pay those taxes, well, then the theft of his $5 worth loaf of bread is still occurring. It's just occurring in a way that is less direct. Though it is impractical for a society or government to exist without it, taxation is mostly just theft with extra steps. It's just that A, the government, is stealing from C, the baker, then giving it to B, the customer. Instead of it being directly stolen from C, the baker or mugging victim, by entity B, the customer or mugger. In terms of safety and morality, I do think this is an improvement, but in some ways it's worse, because now you've added administrative costs, as the government needs an increased bureaucracy to gather and enforce the taxes, and then disseminate the taxes. So the baker is losing $5 either way, either a $5 worth loaf of bread or $5 being directly taxed from them. But at least in a direct robbery, the robber gains $5. With the government involved, the business owner loses $5, while the robber, or in this case a customer getting government food credits, may only receive $3 of value after all the bureaucratic and administrative costs to run that program. A big difference between the two is that negative liberty is, I want it, so let me do the work to build it or convince someone to do what I want willfully. But positive liberty is, I want it, so please force someone to give it to me for free or involuntarily. Various forms of social inequality are often used as justification to sacrifice some negative freedom to grant some positive freedom. And to be sure, an imbalance of power can lead to less direct coercive measures existing in a free market. See the link above for a video about that. Conveniently, this roughly boils down to free market capitalism versus command economy socialism or communism as a debate, just from a different angle. This leads to a lot of parallel arguments between the two. For example, free markets or a society favoring negative liberty generally result in better typical outcomes. Almost everyone in society is better off, but some are far better off, and some only marginally so. And of course, there are always some exceptions where some people end up even worse off. Whereas primarily controlled or command economies, who favor positive liberty, can, in theory, end up with less inequality, but they also have a lower typical outcome for most people. To see why, click the video link at the end of this video. 2. It doesn't have to be this way. This does not mean that zero provision for positive liberty should exist. It's good to have some degree of social safety nets to exist so that people don't get put into a situation where they have to steal to survive. That's good for everyone's safety. There are also some cases where government intervention can actually enhance the private sector's performance. For example, some Scandinavian countries have a welfare system that includes covering your living expenses for a number of months while you attempt to start your own business. This costs money to the society at large, therefore it impedes on the society's negative liberty. But it reduces the barrier to entry for business and therefore increases competition, causing the companies in Scandinavia to, on average, perform better than they would if they were safe and secure in their status, and also giving these prospective entrepreneurs better access to positive freedom. Now, there is a way to provide a degree of positive liberty without infringing on negative liberty. Going back to our earlier issue of the baker or store owner being taxed $5 to help someone pay for their bread, that's only a violation of their negative liberty if they don't want to donate those proceeds to that purpose. But if enough people living in this town where our hypothetical story takes place believe that there should be social safety nets, like food credits, well, that's when you get things like mutual aid societies or fraternal organizations, where people can organize together or donate voluntarily to a cause. Churches, charities, and some nonprofit organizations still do this. In the past, many so-called secret societies, like the Freemasons or Oddfellows, did things like that. That's why so many political leaders were in these organizations. It was about community involvement. The same people who want to be involved in helping society by non-government means may also want to do so by running for office later. Go figure. For more on that, see the above video on leadership lessons from Hollywood. With these voluntary sources of safety nets, our aforementioned hungry person can join one of these mutual aids, and they would help them until they get back on their own 2 feet. And then hopefully at some point, if this person's doing well enough that they have some discretionary time or discretionary money, they would then be able to help others. I'm considering making a video on social safety nets and secret societies or aid societies. Comment below if you'd like to see that. But the short version is that they used to be more common and are less common now, in part because of how heavily taxed we already are and the reduction in our score on Theta Scotchbowl's community indices. The key takeaway there being that you don't have to sacrifice negative liberty to generate at least some positive liberty, but doing so would involve making at least temporarily painful policy choices in the US. Remember earlier when I said that the direct robbery of $5 is more cost efficient than taxation? Well, mutual aid also tends to be more efficient than government programs because, first of all, they tend to have a bunch of volunteers, something that people do for free as part of the club, or they also tend to just have smaller bureaucracies, which means even if you're paying people full-time to do this, they end up spending less money just running the program. Issue number 3. It's kind of like money is roughly a proxy for someone's time. It takes time to do things that make money, even if some of us will make more or less money in the same time. I'm not making a dime from YouTube, but my salaried profession pays very well. In a way, then, that means providing positive liberty involuntarily through government means is a less direct form of forced labor. Though not as direct as true slavery, you might imagine slave owners of various kinds had a ton of positive liberty. They had the means to do much of what they want. Have you ever wished you were in 2 places at once? Well, if you literally owned another person, you could have the other person double whatever it is you want to do. That gives you much better access to the things that you want to have or do. That's one of the issues with positive liberty, given that funding is frequently a proxy for someone's labor. That means to a point you are forcing someone's labor, because now that person will have to exert more labor to generate more value to pay for all of that tax revenue. 4. Positive liberty is generally less important than negative liberty in the long run. We think of social welfare policies in modern times as a means to provide positive freedom at the cost of negative freedom. However, let's rewind to caveman days. Imagine an alien species of advanced knowledge, wisdom, technology, and infinite resources comes down. They decide to conquer us all and install communist utopia. You can only eat these berries off of those bushes, and hunting meat is only allowed on weekends. You are lacking in negative liberty. But no matter what, the aliens will provide you adequate, or even potentially really pleasant, food, water, and shelter each day. This would guarantee our species' survival, but I think many of you may already see a likely negative side effect. Assuming the aliens did not wish to share their technology, only care for us as animals, all of that positive freedom would have led to a lack of innovation on our part. Both safety and a little sting are best for ingenuity. If you are perfectly safe, humans, by and large, attempt nothing. If it is all done by force, humans execute without enthusiasm. We would likely lack cars, planes, ships of any noteworthy size, the internet, computers, books, and more. Air conditioning. We'd be lacking air conditioning. I would die. I cannot live without air conditioning. Modern society exists in part because in a state of nature, kind of like the deserted island we talked about earlier, humans are exclusively and overwhelmingly guaranteed negative liberty. and positive liberty is a relatively modern idea. There's a small space where some people can conflate positive and negative liberty. You could play linguistic games and mental gymnastics to say that my negative liberty to be safe impedes on your negative liberty to do bodily autonomy. In plainer language, if you aren't allowed to punch me in the face, as in attack me, you've lost some bodily autonomy. However, I find those arguments to largely be intellectually dishonest. If I'm expecting to be left alone, that's negative freedom. If I'm obligating you to do something besides leave me alone, then that's positive freedom. However, I'm happy to hear feedback in the comments, how to better express what I'm trying to get at here. In effect, most cases of having or using positive freedom are derived from having wealth. Wealth created by humans innovating as a result of their boundless negative freedom. If you want to give everyone perfect positive liberty, it's kind of like plugging a power strip into itself for infinite electricity. That's not really how the electricity works. That's not to say we should have zero space for positive liberty, but overwhelmingly, we should focus on keeping negative liberty secure and be very picky about any case where we want to sacrifice a degree of negative freedom in order to generate positive freedom. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and share the video with others you think would be interested. You only have one life to live. Grow it relentlessly.